Hello, this is Father Jason Ingalls. I'm the rector or senior pastor at Holy Spirit Episcopal Church in Waco, Texas. This presentation was originally given at the end of October as we talked about moving into a new phase of our church's life. If you happen to be in church when this presentation was made, stay tuned because things have changed. Now, we've all experienced it, the phantom traffic jam. You spend an hour getting to the bottleneck, and then when you get there, there isn't a cop. There isn't an accident. People just start speeding up again. And you're left to wonder, now, why did we spend all that time at a near stop? As a parish, we've often asked a similar question. Why can't we seem to grow beyond a certain point? The purpose of this presentation is to expose the phantom traffic jam that has stifled our growth and lay out the steps we're going to take to correct it. And we're going to do that by asking three questions. Why start a new service? How should we start a new service? And what might these new services look like? So first of all, why start a new service? The most basic answer is because I believe it will help us fulfill our mission to become and share the good news of Jesus Christ. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells his disciples to make disciples. If disciples of Jesus are making disciples, then one important thing is going to happen. God will add to their number, as it says in the book of Acts. Holy Spirit Episcopal Church has seen periods of growth and decline. And in the periods of growth, there has been a frustration. It has always felt like there was an invisible barrier that we could not cross. Why was it? Why couldn't we seem to grow? To answer that question, we need to answer another question. Why do phantom traffic jams happen? Well, as any system approaches 80% capacity, it starts to bog down. Approaching 80% capacity, not at 80% capacity, cars are too close to each other. As soon as one of them has to slam on their brakes for any reason, then it causes a whole cascade of problems backwards through the system. Everyone slams on their brakes, and from then on, since the freeway is so full, it slows down at that point until the capacity problem is resolved. And this is important. When it comes to a phantom traffic jam, it only resolves itself when there are fewer cars on the road. Capacity limits what is possible in the system. So, what is our capacity? When I arrived here, there were lots of guesses. Some people said 225, some people said 250. Well, eventually I found a good rule of thumb that we should allow 30 to 36 inches per person, and that we should measure the pews and see what our actual capacity is. At the presentation on a Sunday morning, I had 5 volunteers stand up, and I had the first 2 volunteers stand with their shoulders touching. I then put a yardstick from the place where their shoulders touched out to show the person that if they were sitting touching the person next to them in the nave, that really most people only have about 6 inches between them and the next person in the nave if we allow 30 inches. Now you get closer to a foot if we allowed 36, but 30 inches is not a lot of space per person. So what is our capacity in the nave? Measuring at 30 inches, that makes our nave a 130 person capacity. If we measure at 36 inches, that drops the capacity to 116 people. Now that puts the 80% mark somewhere between 93 and 104 people in the nave. And that means that given what's just true about the world, what shows up in phantom traffic jams and shows up in systems all over the world, that means that somewhere between 93 and 104 people in the nave is too full. Does that capacity, though, does that capacity of 116 to 130 make sense? Well, yes, it does, if we look at the historic patterns of growth and decline in both services. Here is a diagram of our 8 o'clock service over 30 years, and you can see that it goes from 1986 to 2015. So here we have Diesel's tenure, Grant comes on, Crawford comes on here, Konecki pops things up, John Wells, and then me coming in 2014. And you can see that in the 8 o'clock service, these are the average Sunday attendance for the service for the entire year. The most that we've been able to have at the 8 o'clock service on a consistent basis is 41 on average, which leads to an average, which is what this line is, an average in the 8 o'clock service of around 32 or 33 people. Now here is a graph for the 1030 service from 1986 to 2015. You can see we started out with the end of Jack Diesel's tenure, Grant, Crawford, Konetsky, John Wells, and then my arrival here. A couple of things to point out in this, does this 116 to 130 capacity make sense? Is that first of all, the highest number that we've been able to maintain over the course of a year is an average of 134 in the nave. So this maps really well with that understanding that maybe around 130 is where things are too full. But what clinched it for me in answering the question, does this make sense, is that this line right here is the average of these averages over the course of 30 years. And if you had to guess, what do you think that would be? Well, it's 104. And 104 is exactly 80% capacity of the 130 person capacity that we've been talking about so far as the capacity of the nave. So it does make sense. The space itself has meant that we can max out in that service at about 130, but that in the long term we're going to average in and around that 80% mark. What does that mean? Well, it means that over the course of time, the 1030 service has grown just about as much as it can. And here is a diagram of the month by month since I have arrived. The yellow line is 75% capacity of 130. The blue line is 80% capacity of 130. And you can see here just how much we were playing around this danger zone in my first few months before going into my first summer. If I'd known then what I know now, we would have been starting a new service somewhere in March of 2015, because as soon as I got here, the space was already too full. We had potential for growth that we didn't know was there, but the potential for growth was not in packing out the 1030 service. The potential for growth was in starting a new one altogether. So why start a new service? Well, the main reason is our service arrangement is the phantom traffic jam that has prevented our growth. So we've asked why, so how? How should we start a new service? The first way is by thinking globally about growth at Holy Spirit. And we're going to need to do that by asking another question. What does a full weekend of worship look like at Holy Spirit? Well, we can step back and imagine that if we were full, if we were running services as much as we could without any one of them overlapping, we might start out with a Thursday evening service for people who work Sunday mornings or who are away most weekends. We would continue with a Saturday evening service. We would then move into a Sunday morning at 7:30, followed by a parish breakfast, Sunday 9 o'clock, Sunday school, and then Sunday 11:15 topped off with Sunday at 5:45 p.m. That is something that is a full weekend of worship at Holy Spirit that would make sense for a lot of different reasons. It's also probably 15 or 20 years down the road. But what does it mean if each of these services was only 60% full and our 7:30 service retained its ongoing average of about 24? Well, this is what it would look like. 78 people at each of these services at 60% full. And if that were the case over the course of a year, we'd be looking at an average Sunday attendance of about 414. And if our average giving per average Sunday attender, and most of us, unless we're here every single week of the year, don't count as a full average Sunday attender, our giving per average Sunday attendance would mean that our budget would be somewhere around $800,000. Growing into this over the course of time, over the course of 20 years, would mean that we would have a sustainable parish, that there would be a gospel outpost at 1624 Wooded Acres Drive for as long as we could imagine. So the next question, though, is what is the best way to start working towards that goal, that 15, 20-year goal of a full weekend of worship? Well, we do that by getting our Sunday morning in order first. Why? Because, first of all, it has the highest chance of attracting new attenders. We live in Waco, Texas. People understand what church is. People understand that church usually happens on Sunday morning. So if we can do Sunday morning well first, that has the best chance of success. But the second reason is just, what did your dad always say? Is that you should do the hardest thing first. People have been saying, well, this sounds like a great plan. Why don't we start with Thursday evening? Why don't we start with Sunday at 5:45? The main reason is if we're going to set up ourselves, if we're going to set up Holy Spirit Episcopal Church for a long-term growth and stability, then we need to do the hardest thing first and deal with Sunday morning first. How are we going to start a new service? First of all, we're going to do that by thinking globally and working towards that growth together. Second of all, by getting your help. Now I have a vision about what these services might look like, but I need you to test and refine that vision. We're starting now, and by watching this presentation, by filling out the survey in the comment section below, you are on the ground floor. You are giving us your feedback in such a way that we can hear and receive it, and that gets roped into our planning going forward. By thinking globally, by getting your help, and by invitation. Now, already twice a year, we send invitations out to the 5,000 nearest households to Holy Spirit. And when it comes to starting this service, we're going to do that kind of general invitation. And we will send out a postcard to those 5,000 people. We will blast things on Facebook. We will put banners out on the road so that people driving down Wooded Acres can see that we're moving to a new service arrangement. This works. It works really well. But what works even better is not just general invitation, but personal invitation. So think about your friends. Do you have someone in your life that you know you could count on in a crunch to help you do something important in your life? Whenever we end up starting the new arrangement, we'll invite those people to join us for 3 weeks, just to help us get things off the ground and rolling. We'd be very clear that there was no obligation to stay after those 3 weeks were up, though I think definitely that some will stay when they see what God is doing in this place. By thinking globally, by getting your help, by invitation, and by taking it slowly. The only way we will start a new service is if we are ready to start a new service. And by ready, I mean we have the volunteers, we have a reasonable chance of success. All of these things, all of the groundwork will be laid and in place before we start a new service. To get ready, there has to be a lot of investing in our current members' spiritual lives. We have to train new volunteers. We have to develop the capacity in the congregation to do what needs to be done. So to that end, I am working towards a tentative launch date for our new services of September 9th, 2018. As of this recording, that's about 10 months from now. We are going to do this by taking it slowly and by doing it right. So we've asked, why should we start a new service? How will we start a service? Now, what will those new services look and sound like? This is my vision that I want to be tested and refined as we go. So in this new Sunday morning, we have Sunday at 7:30, Sunday at 9, and Sunday at 11:15. The 7:30, we're talking about a Rite One morning prayer with Eucharist. Every day of the week, we have morning prayer at 7:30 in the morning, and this service will continue that tradition on Sunday morning. But what will be different from the other days of the week is that this will be a full service. There will be a homily, there will be prayers, there will be Eucharist every Sunday of the year. At 9 a.m., we're talking about having a Rite to folk mass, and I'll come back to describe this in more detail in a moment. And then 11:15, a Rite to high mass. Now, a 9 o'clock folk mass looks first of all like what we know. It's the Book of Common Prayer. The liturgy is going to be the same. what was going to be a little bit different is the way we think about the music. So in our tradition, we have something called the West Gallery Choir. A long time ago, before the organ, there were people who came and sat in the West Gallery. They brought their instruments, they sang, they led the singing in the church for everyone else. Now this worked really well, except until it didn't. And what happened then was that the organ, this newfangled piece of technology, would come in and replaced a lot of these choirs throughout England, and that's the tradition that we have inherited as well. But I'd really like to reinvigorate this idea of the music, the musical worship of our parish coming from the ground up in this service, be driven mainly by guitar and piano and other instruments in the congregation. The 11:15 High Mass would still be Book of Common Prayer. We're still talking about the same liturgical formation that we've already had, but with more cathedral or monastic style music. So we're talking about a choir, we're talking about an organ, we're talking about a lot more chanting, a lot more singing parts of the service, both me as your priest and you as members of the congregation, that we lift this prayer in song to God week after week, and probably more incense, but we'll have to see on that based on your feedback. So, in conclusion, why? Because our current service arrangement has stifled our growth, and God has called us to grow, has called us to become and share the good news of Jesus Christ. How? By thinking globally, by getting your help, by intentional invitation, and by taking it slowly. What? 3 services on Sunday morning, rearranged. Now, in the survey link that you find in the description of this video, I want to ask you 3 questions. What stood out to you in this presentation? Why did you choose the group that you chose? Why did you choose the service that you think you might be attending? And how do you think God is calling you to be involved? Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, listen and watch this presentation. Thank you for taking on the responsibility of growing with us, of praying with us, of serving God with us. It is my hope that as we continue, as we expand into new services, that we will see that lighter traffic, lower capacity, so that we have the ability to plant seeds for the Holy Spirit Episcopal Church of 2027, laying the groundwork for long-term, sustainable gospel ministry at 1624 Wooded Acres Drive.